Hey everybody. Good to see all of you. Hope you're all having a good day, having a good night. We be vibing, we be moving. Hope you don't hate the mustache that's still growing in. I'm sorry in advance for that. Although I'm really not, because it's beautiful, okay? And I'm beautiful. And you can't take that away from me. I'm perfect. Exceptional even. Boom, boom, boom. Sorry about that, guys. All right, everybody. So, what are we doing here? I am trying to do some learning tonight. Hope all of you are willing to learn with me. Apparently, there was some weird fucky shit happening in Brazil with some people storming buildings and stuff. So I wanted to do a bit more of a deep dive and read about it. Fun fact for everybody, I'm doing Drunken Debates this Friday. It's going to be super fun. And they don't give you topics beforehand, so I'm really just trying to do some research on most relevant topics that are happening right now. So, I'm probably going to do a deep dive into the Brazil stuff, do a dive into the Twitter files stuff, do a dive. I think like something happened today about Biden having classified documents. I might dive into that. So those are the ones that I'm mostly going to be covering. So this week is going to be a lot of research streams. Sorry if that's not your cup of tea. But this Friday will be a big fun debate with a lot of other fun and interesting people. So at least I hope that is. I fucking hope it's current events and not just random. Like, abortion debate 5001. Gross. So, hopefully, it's not going to be like that. It'll be less cringe, more fun. So, we're going to do what we do. Also, sorry that I haven't been around as long as, around as much as I wanted to once I started streaming again. Partially work stuff, but also I've been on vacation for the last 2 weeks. So, yeah. So, and I haven't been streaming because first I was like my parents' house visiting with my family, and then I was with my, what's the word? And then I was with my partner here, and I wasn't going to stream while they were visiting me. So, as I said, family and partner takes precedence over a lot of other things. One second. But, yeah. Sorry, 1 second. Let's see. All right, everybody. 1 second. Let's get this going, and then we can begin. Don't hang, folks. All right, here we go. Let's get this started. So let's start with some background to the Brazilian elections, because I don't know about you guys, I'm not an expert in Brazilian politics at all, so I think it's important to get some background on what the fuck exactly happened here, and it's what we're talking about. So, Brazil general election. General elections were held in Brazil on the 2nd of October for president, vice president, Congress, the governors, vice governors, and legislative assemblies. as no candidate for president or governor in some states received more than half of the valid votes in the first round, a runoff election was held on the 30th of October. Lula received the majority of the votes in the second round and became president-elect of Brazil. Incumbent President Bolsonaro was seeking a second term. He was elected in 2018 as a candidate of the Social Liberal Party, but left that party in 2019, followed by the resignation dismissal of his ministers during his term. After a failed attempt to create the Alliance for Brazil, he joined the Liberal Party in 2021. For the 2022 election, he selected Walter Braga Neto of the same party as his vice president, rather than his incumbent VP, Hamilton Mauro. Former President Lula of the left-wing Workers' Party was a candidate for a third non-consecutive term after having been previously elected in 2002 and 2006. His successor from the same party, former President Dilma Rousseff, was elected in 2010 and re-elected in 2014, but was impeached and removed from office in 2016 due to accusations of administrative misconduct. His intended candidacy in 2018, this is Lula, was disallowed because of his conviction on corruption charges in 2017 and a subsequent arrest. There was a series of court rulings that led to his release from prison in 2019, followed by the annulment of his conviction and restoration of his political rights by 2021. So he won in the courts, got released from prison, his conviction was annulled, and he was restored to political rights by 2021. For his VP candidate in the 2022, he selected Geraldo Alckmin, who had been a presidential candidate of the Brazilian Social Democracy Party in 2006, facing Lula in the second round and in 2018, but changed his affiliation to the Brazilian Socialist Party in 2022. So he selected the Socialist Party VP. So I assume Brazil has the multi-party system where you normally have to form coalitions or even like for presidential tickets. Lula got the most votes in the first round at 48% to Bolsonaro's 43%, being the first presidential candidate to obtain more votes than the incumbent president in Brazil. So Lula came out in the first one ahead of Bolsonaro. While Lula came close to being elected in the first round, the difference between the two leading candidates was closer than what most opinion polls had suggested, and right-wing parties made gains in the National Congress. Nevertheless, Lula's vote share was the second best performance for the Workers' Party in the first round of a presidential election, behind only his own record of 48.61%, so 0.2% higher in 2006. In the second round, he received 50.9% of the votes to Bolsonaro's 49.10%, the closest presidential election result in Brazil to date. Lula I assume that's where a lot of them are coming from in regards to potential corruption, but it doesn't seem like there's a ton here yet about that, so we're going to wait. Lula became the first person to secure a third presidential term, receiving the highest number of votes in a Brazilian election. At the same time, Bolsonaro became the first incumbent president to lose a bid for second term, since they allowed consecutive re-election. In response to Lula's advantage in the polls, Bolsonaro made several premature allegations of electoral fraud. Many observers denounced these allegations as false and expressed concerns that they could be used to challenge the outcome of the election. On the 1st of November, during his first public remarks after the election, Bolsonaro refused to elaborate on the result, while authorizing his chief of staff to begin the transition process with representatives from... While authorizing his chief of staff to begin authorizing the transition process with representatives of President-elect Lula on the 3rd of November. So, the second round happened on the 30th of October, and then he gave his chief of staff the go-ahead to do the turnover, or the transition process. On the 22nd of November, Bolsonaro and his party requested that the Superior Electoral Court invalidate the votes recorded by electronic voting machines that lacked identification numbers.
Fucking stop and calm down a little.
With 51% of the remaining valid votes. On the next day, the court rejected the request and fined the party 22 million Brazil, or 4.3 million USD, for what it considered bad faith litigation. Lula was sworn in on the 1st of January 2023. A week later, pro-Bolsonaro protesters stormed the Praça dos Três Poderes, which I assume is like their house or something. Yo, what's up, Jeb? Hey, Sammy, good to see you guys. Thanks for this Prime subscription, buddy. I really appreciate it. Ziguro, interesting how in a lot of Latin America, the rural communities tend to lean more left. It's the opposite in industrialized countries. True, Ziguro. That is interesting. I guess we could look into that at some point. It's probably because they might see more tangible benefits under left-wing governments. Maybe there's like given more aid, which might, but you never know. Maybe it's just traditions of left-wing stuff coming out from farmers as opposed to more industrial folks. Or it might be a difference in regards to maybe quality of life. Maybe people in the rural areas either have less quality of life in this than in the cities, or honestly, that's all speculation, guys. Like I'm not an expert in South American politics at all, so let's take that with a grain of salt. But it is interesting. Word more like lev. Or that's not even. They didn't even finish the pun. Sammy, you gotta come in harder. All right, you gotta. All right, let's see. So the background from 94 to 2014, presidential elections were dominated by candidates of the centrist Brazilian Social Democracy Party and the left-wing Workers' Party. After unsuccessful attempts in 1989, in 94, and in 98 presidential elections, the Workers' Party candidate Lula was elected in. Oh, so he attempted 3 times, but then he won twice in 2002 and 2006. So Lula won twice after losing 3 times. His successor was from the same party. Okay. In the 2010 and 2014 elections, and then the controversial 2016 impeachment of Rousseff removed her from office due to administrative misconduct, and she was succeeded by her vice president Michel Temer in the centrist Brazilian Democratic Movement. In 2017, Operation Car Wash controversially resulted in Lula being convicted on charges of corruption by Judge Sergei Moro and arrested, and that prevented his candidacy in 2018. Despite his lead in the polls, he was replaced by his party's presidential candidate by former mayor of Sao Paulo, Fernando Haddad, who lost to far-right candidate Bolsonaro of the Social Liberal Party. In 2019, Bolsonaro left the Social Liberal Party. We already had that. He appointed a Minister of Justice and Public Safety, who became his VP. Oh, no, sorry. This was followed by the dismissal or resignation of many members of his previous administration. Okay, including people who he had appointed as Minister of Public Safety. Okay. He attempted to create another party. The Alliance for Brazil was unsuccessful. And then in 2021, he joined the Liberal Party and selected Walter Braga Neto of his party as the VP. Okay. A series of rulings by the Supreme Federal Court questioning the legality of Lula's trial and the impartiality of then-Judge Moro led to Lula's release from prison in 2019, followed by the annulment of Moro's cases against Lula and the restoration of Lula's rights by 2021. Lula launched his candidacy for president in 2022, selecting his VP candidate, Geraldo Alckmin, who had been a presidential candidate for the Brazilian Social Democracy Party in 2006 and 2018, but changed his affiliation to the left-wing Brazilian Socialist Party in 2022. 3 parties supporting Bolsonaro in 2022 had supported Alckmin in 2018 and Rousseff in 2014. After Bolsonaro's departure from the Social Liberal Party, the party merged with the Democrats to form the Brazil Union in 2022. Okay. So the electoral system, VP and president are on a joint ticket using the 2-round system. First round, on the second, you need more than 50%. If 50% isn't hit, the 2 candidates who receive the most votes in the first round go into a runoff. Okay. And then it's the candidate who receives a plurality of votes. So there's only 2 rounds. And even if you don't get 50% the second time, it's just whoever has the most votes at that point. Okay. And then the Chamber of Deputies, the federal deputies, were elected from 27 multi-member constituencies corresponding to the states and the federal district. Okay. And then voters. Voting in Brazil is allowed for all citizens over 16. There is compulsory voting for literate citizens between 18 and 70, except conscripts, as there's conscription in the Brazil, and those who serve the mandatory military service are not allowed to vote. Okay, interesting. That seems weird, but maybe it's to avoid a dictatorship or something like that. It's probably to avoid potential favoritism by whoever's currently in power. Like, oh, I'll give the conscripts like this number of benefits if they vote for me. So it might just be a foresight to avoid potential corruption and influence by the military. What is up? The 2010s was River killed the doctor. What's up, River? Good to see you. Lula. The 2010s were dominated by far-right populist movements across the world. Hopefully the chapter started to end. I hope so, Zaguro. Right-wing populists are really annoying. And I don't like how they destabilize countries. So, all candidates for federal, state, and offices must be nominated by a political party. Okay. For offices to be elected proportionally, each party must nominate candidates of each sex with a distribution between 30 and 70%. Interesting. And then procedure. Voting in Brazilian elections can only be done in person and only on election day, which is always a Sunday. There's no provision for either postal or voting or early voting. Voter registration must be done in advance, and each voter can only vote in one designated voting station, either based on the voter's registered domicile or a different location that the voter must specifically request if planning to be there temporarily on election day. Voters must provide photo ID at their voting station before proceeding to vote. So it seems like there's a lot of safeguards for this one. Reading about other electoral systems makes you think how silly the electoral college is. True. Voting is done almost entirely on DRE voting machines designed for extreme simplicity. The voter dials a number corresponding to the desired candidate or party, causing the name and photo of the candidate to appear on the screen. Then the voter presses a green button to confirm or an orange button to correct and try again. It is also possible to leave the vote blank by pressing a white button, or to nullify the vote by dialing a number that does not correspond to any candidate or party. Paper ballots can only be used in case of voting machine malfunctions or in locations abroad with fewer than 100 voters. The electronic system is subject to extensive tests, including on machines randomly selected from actual voting stations on election day, witnessed by political parties to rule out fraud. This seems like a pretty good system. After voting ends, each machine prints a record of its total votes for each candidate or party, which is publicly displayed for comparison with the results published electronically. The system delivers the complete election results with usually a few hours after voting ends, which is extremely fast for such a large population as Brazil. At the same time, the system does not create a physical record of individual votes to allow a full election recount. So that might be a small weakness there. The partial vote count for an office can only start being published after voting has ended in all locations in Brazil voting for that office to avoid influencing those still voting. I think that's a good system. Due to time zones in Brazil, in the previous years, the vote count for president, the one that combines votes from more than one state, could only start being published after voting ended time central 500. I don't know. It's some time zone. Sorry. I don't know what fucking time zones are. I'm American, okay? There's Eastern time, there's Central time. I don't know which one that is, all right? To avoid the undesirable wait, the Superior Electoral Court ordered for 2022 the voting stations will operate at the same time in the whole country regardless of their time zone. Okay, so they standardized the voting time across all time zones to avoid a wait time. That seems pretty fast. So, 2 more sets. You got this, Jeb. What's up, Mithazak? Good to see you, buddy. Milthazak. I fucked up your name once before. Is it Milt Hazak? Or I'm sorry, I'm blanking. Right now we're just reading about Brazilian elections. So let's see where we go. Boom, 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 boom. Milthazak. Okay, so I was close. Influencing still voting due to time zones in Brazil. In previous years, the vote count for president only start being published after voting ended. Okay. The unified voting time does not apply to voting stations for citizens abroad. Okay. Even though some of them end up to 4 hours after the initial time. So, candidates in the runoff. Lula, Bolsonaro, their vice presidents. Then their coalition for Lula, which is the Workers' Party, was Brazil of Hope, which is a combination of Workers' Party, Communist Party. There's a lot of different parties. There's PSOL. Give me the link. Come on. Is a political party in Brazil, far left, or left-leaning party. Solidarity, Social Democratic Party, Avante, centrist political party, ACT, and then Social Party. Okay. So candidates that didn't go to the runoff, there's the New Party, the Christian Democracy Party. So a lot of these like didn't make it to the second run. So it's these two guys. All right. So additional support for the second round came from Democratic Labor Party, Ciudadania, the Communists, the United Social Workers Party, and Popular Unity, and that all in behind Lula. And then you had the Social Christian Party and the Brazilian Labor Party go behind Bolsonaro. Okay. So, looking now at incidents. Since the beginning of the election campaign in August 2022, and before that, various political commentators said that the incumbent president, Bolsonaro, incited physical or verbal violence against his critics and political opponents, especially women, such as saying that he and supporters must obliterate the opposition Workers' Party. Okay, we'll hold our judgment on that. Engaging in a smear campaign of political commentators, journalists, and interviews on social media and speeches, and on one occasion trying to grab a phone from a disillusioned voter and YouTuber who confronted him in a rally. An Amnesty International survey found that in 3 months leading up to the first round and the 2nd of October, there was at least one case of political violence every 2 days, with 88% of cases in September alone, including murders, threats against voters, physical assaults, and restrictions on freedom of movement for candidates. On the 5th of October, the Observatory of Political and Electoral Violence in Brazil of the Federal University of the State of Rio de Janeiro had recorded at least 212 cases of political violence between July and September of this year, an increase of 110% compared to the previous quarter. I'm not sure how useful that is, because it seems like if things were ramping up during an election, it would be during the end of the election cycle. So I'm not sure how useful that is. According to the survey, leaders of 29 parties were hit by some kind of violence in the third quarter. The Workers' Party received the highest number of targets with 37 cases, or 17.5%. And there was the Socialism and Liberty Party with 19.9%, while the Global Justice and Land of Rights organizations recorded 247 episodes of political violence in 2022, a 400% increase in the number of cases recorded in 2018. Okay, so this is from the initial... this is from, like, the last election. Okay. At least 121 cases occurred between the 1st of August and the 2nd of October, and there were at least 32 episodes of intimidation or violence against interviewers from research institutes such as Datafolha, Impact, and Quest until the 5th of October. So it seems like there was like instance of political violence leading up to this election. So I got you, Milthasack. I'll give you advice whenever you want, buddy. Let me finish the breakdown for this first. We shall see. All right. In June, a Bolsonaro supporter was arrested after throwing fireworks at Lula supporters during a political act of the Workers' Party in Rio. Several Lula supporters had already been hit by a liquid described as a sewage launched from a drone that flew over a pre-campaign event of the Workers' Party before, which featured former Mayor Alexandra Kilil, at the time the Social Democratic Party pre-candidate for the government of Minas Gerais. The suspect, agriculturist Rio Luiz Pereira, was arrested a week later. In July, a walk with Marcelo Freixo, the Brazilian Socialist Party candidate for the government of Rio, had to be abruptly closed after armed supporters of a state deputy appeared on the site and made threats. Of a state deputy. Interesting. Did say who... Is there a party for the deputy? I want the party for the deputy. Also in July, a homemade bomb was set off at a Lula rally in downtown Rio, leaving no injuries. The perpetrator was arrested. Days before that, Bolsonaro supporters surrounded a vehicle carrying Lula in the city of Campinas. Yo, what's up, Akana boy? How you doing, King? Just get the fuck out of your knee. Akana boy, did you disclare your knee doing jujitsu? Were you fighting? So, that is pretty shitty, though. Hope you're okay, buddy. Right now, we're going over the Brazilian elections. So right now, it seems like there was a good amount of violence leading up to this election. It seemed to be targeted towards the left-leaning parties. So, On the 10th of July, a city guard, a Worker Party activist, was murdered for political reasons during his birthday party at a community center in the state of Pereira. Interesting. A federal prison officer was arrested for storming the victim's party, shouting that he was a supporter of Bolsonaro and shooting at Arruda. She was also injured during the attack due to self-defense exercised by the victim. Based on an incorrect statement from the local police, some media outlets mistakenly reported that the men killed each other. The police later backtracked from the statement and stated instead that Guarano had been hospitalized. So a Worker Party activist was murdered. Okay. Also, on the 10th of July, the local police opened an investigation into the crime's motivation. A day later, the police officer leading the probe was found to have previously made online posts against the Workers' Party, potentially violating due process because of abuse of power, which unofficially caused her to be removed from the investigation. Okay, so that's not a good situation. We had a Workers' Party activist get shot, and then it seemed like the local police, the person on the case, was a bit biased, and they removed them because of their potential biases. So that was good inside, like, in the change of removing them and the correction, but the initial attack was a bit of a problem. So, oh my gosh. Econo Boy, stop shattering people's mothers. Be careful, Econo Boy. Good lord. Yeah, like, if you keep dislocating it, you're going to hurt yourself worse. And we don't want that. All right. So on the 11th of July, he ordered the pretrial arrest of the suspect, but after 4 days, they conclude there was no political motivation for the crime. Interesting. And then on the 18th of July, both the prosecutors and the family disputed the conclusion, citing the fact that the police did not search the shooter's phone and did not investigate a possible connection with the suicide of a security service worker in the community center who had allegedly sent the party footage to the suspect. The following day, the judge overseeing the case ordered the police to redo the inquiry, taking account into these claims. On the 20th of July, the prosecutors charged Guarano, the murderer, with first-degree murder for political reasons, and he was bound over for trial. On the 10th of August, following his discharge from hospital, he was temporarily placed under house arrest and forced to wear an ankle monitor, and then sent to prison 2 days later. Yeah, kind of like always. Yeah, take care of your knees. If you're training with your knees, depending on what you're doing, if you're like doing squats and stuff, wear knee sleeves or knee wraps. Like, do what you gotta do to protect yourself, and just don't be careful. If something feels wrong, don't push through it. If you have like a history of injuries. So, in August, interviewer was chased by 4 men shouting "communists" and leftists. The men tried to pick up the tablet she used to conduct the research. On September, 2 farm workers had an argument over politics and their preferred presidential candidates in a rural property of the city of Confresa. And then a 24-year-old Bolsonaro supporter reportedly stabbed his 42-year-old co-worker, a supporter of Lula, 70 times because the first 69 didn't send the message. Jesus Christ. Reportedly, let's see. After both had been arguing for hours on the same day, and the situation escalated to a physical altercation. During the fight, Olivia reportedly took a knife and started stabbing Santos in his eyes, forehead, and neck after Santos had punched Olivia in the chin, according to local police. Following the murder, the suspect tried to behead the victim's body with an axe, but eventually gave up and went to a local health care center seeking medical assistance, where he was seen by a doctor and subsequently arrested by the police. He was also under criminal investigations for unrelated crimes such as homicide, rape, and fraud, according to the police in a court ruling. Not good people. Okay. There's a lot of political violence in September going into October. On the 13th of September, a 44-year-old Bolsonaro supporter attacked a city councilwoman. He used his car to hit hers. So, and that man who rammed the city woman's car, he's fatally suffered an accident while attempting to escape the manhunt that was after him. On the 9th of September, a group of Bolsonaro supporters verbally abused, kicked, and punched a blind man who was wearing a Lula campaign button as he took the subway in the city of Recife in the northeastern state of Pernambuco. The victim's wife said her husband had a seizure due to the assault while he was in the hospital for a first appointment, and he had to remain hospitalized for 3 days. On the 20th of September, an election survey interviewer was assaulted by a Bolsonaro supporter while the victim was interviewing another person. The victim's employer, the pollster Dada Folha, said that there were been at least 10 similar cases since the campaign officially started in August of 2022. In September, a farm worker was murdered after he answered a question made by a Bolsonaro supporter. According to eyewitnesses, the Bolsonaro supporter entered a bar and shouted, "Who supports Lula?" for which Silva said he would vote for Lula, and the friar stabbed him in the ribs. He was seen by a doctor but did not survive the injury. The Bolsonaro supporter, who reportedly has criminal records for unrelated domestic violence, was arrested. On the same day, another Bolsonaro supporter was stabbed in a bar in the southern state after he'd gotten into an argument about politics and old family problems with a Workers' Party member whose name was not released by the police. The man who was wearing a Bolsonaro shirt reportedly hit the Workers' Party supporter in the face, and then the latter grabbed Hector by the neck, took him out of the bar, and stabbed him in the leg after a fight, hitting his femoral artery. He then ran across the bar, bleeding, and collapsed due to his wounds. He was taken to the hospital and died the next day. The suspect escaped the scene and went back to his home, and as of the 27th of September, he was still wanted by police. So this is the first instance where we have a Bolsonaro supporter getting stabbed, or getting killed. But in this case, he started the fight. On the 25th of September, a lawmaker for the Workers' Party suffered an assassination attempt. By a police officer, no party affiliation given. On October 4th, a 59-year-old Bolsonaro supporter was murdered after an argument over politics with a 42-year-old Workers' Party supporter. So, question about all the Brazil drama. Let's see. Oh, Jesus, what are you guys talking about? The Brazilians are wilding a Culicho. Good to see you, Culicho. It's been a minute. I'm still trying to find out why Bolsonaro fled. Bum bum bum. So, during the argument, the Bolsonaro supporter allegedly attacked the Workers' Party supporter with a knife, and during the fight, the Workers' Party member used the same knife to stab the Bolsonaro supporter. That's like a fuck around and find out situation. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to celebrate a man's death. It's like you come at somebody with a knife and then he takes the knife and stabs you with it. Oof, that is a fuck around and find out situation. So right now we're at 6 beatings or murders by Bolsonaro people, and then 2 deaths of Bolsonaro people who started fights and got killed. So there seems to be a recurring pattern of violence here, where it seems like a Bolsonaro supporter will try and hurt people and either succeed in killing that person or get killed in return. So let's keep seeing. On the 12th of October, Bolsonaro visited a basilica to accompany religious celebrations. Supporters of the president promoted riots outside at the time and attacked journalists who were covering the ceremony, including those of the TV Aparecida, which was owned by the church, and TV Vanguardia, which is affiliated by TV Globo. They also attacked a man with a red shirt and booed an archbishop who spoke out against hunger. So it was a riot, sort of incited by Bolsonaro. Or at least encouraged by it. On the 13th of August, former lawmaker and Bolsonaro ally Roberto Jefferson was arrested due to his verbal threats to government officials and institutions. On January 2022, he was allowed to move to house arrest for health reasons under the condition that he would not maintain external communication or receive visits other than family members. Jefferson violated these conditions multiple times, and he attempted to be a presidential candidate in the 22 election under the Brazilian Labor Party, but was ruled ineligible due to a previous criminal conviction and was replaced by Kelman Souza. Okay. So, disinformation. Let's keep up with this. River, leave him alone, River. Stop. You're waiting with bated breath because this reads better than a death course on TV Globo. Is that the Globo? Stop it. River, behave. Behave. All right. Disinformation. Disinformation became a major topic in the 2022 elections, and the experiences from previous elections, especially in 2018, led to new approaches by individuals, including election officials, as well as private and public institutions, amid a surge in the use of fake news to discredit political opponents and the electoral system itself. In that context, the Superior Electoral Court issued several law-like guidances regarding disinformation, such as further banning political ads from the internet and tightening penalties for online breaches of the electoral law. Oh wow, that's a lot. In October 2021, after investigation by police and prosecutors, the Superior Electoral Court ruled that Fernando Fraschini, a hardliner lawmaker in the southern state of Parana and ally of Bolsonaro, had violated electoral law by making false claims about the electronic voting system in 2018. The court removed him from his seat in the state legislature and banned him from elected office for the next 8 years. He filed an appeal against the ruling, but it was dismissed by the federal court. On the 20th of September 2022, the court reported it received more than 15,500 electoral-related disinformation complaints over the prior 4 months. On the 24th of September, an incident of bulk messaging was reported in the state of Parana, which was governed by an ally of Bolsonaro. Several phone users said they had received a message from the official state alert messaging service, which read, Bolsonaro was going to win the elections in the first round, otherwise they're going to the streets to protest, we're going to storm the Supreme Court and Congress buildings, Bolsonaro counts on us all. The Superior Electoral Count referred the alleged breach to prosecutors so they could investigate if electoral crime was committed, and if so, to identify its perpetrators. So it seems like allies of Bolsonaro are using state messaging services to say Bolsonaro's going to win, and if he doesn't, we're taking to the streets. You can't do that. I'm pretty sure you can't do that. Sounds pretty fucked up. Electoral fraud allegations. Bolsonaro alleged that electronic voting in Brazil was prone to vote rigging since at least 2015, when he was a member of the Chamber of Deputies, and successfully pushed for a bill requiring voting machines to also print vote records. Brazil's public prosecutor's office challenged the law, citing secret ballot concerns, and the Supreme Federal Court suspended the law in June 2018. So there's a small change. This sounds oddly familiar to the month of January in America. Yeah. In 2018, some social media companies such as YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter restricted or removed videos, live streams, campaign advertisements, online groups and channels, online content monetization, and polls from Bolsonaro, his allies, and supporters linked to election-related disinformation, insurrection, and incitement to violence on their own or by a court order for violating laws or those companies' policies. Despite signing agreements with the Superior Electoral Court in which they committed to fight disinformation, social networks acted slowly or ignored requests to remove it. In July of 2022, Bolsonaro addressed dozens of foreign diplomats, to which he made several claims about vulnerabilities in the country's electronic voting system. Following the presentation, the Electoral Authority issued a statement debunking several of the claims mentioned by Bolsonaro. So the Electoral Authority is debunking claims made by Bolsonaro. Brazilian and international law experts, political analysts, and authorities warn that such allegations undermine democracy and pave the way for an unfounded election result challenge or a self-coup, such as the 2021 U.S. Capitol attack. Interesting. I wonder why they would cite that. Many experts also feared that if Bolsonaro lost the election, the military and local police officers, which helped carry out the 1964 Brazil coup d'etat and were heavily present in his government, could play a significant role in either blocking a peaceful transition of power or being complicit with possible rioters trying to overthrow a newly elected administration. On the 28th of September, 4 days prior to the first round of elections, Bolsonaro's Liberal Party released a statement saying a party report found that there were several flaws in the electoral process conducted by the Superior Electoral Court, adding, without any evidence, that the court only met 5% of all the requirements for a proper election certification. The court dismissed these claims as false and misleading and meant to disturb the electoral process and ordered an investigation into the author of the party's report. So again, it's a right-wing populist who seems to be stoking the flames of potential disinformation and undermining the electoral process. Reactions to a potential coup. On the 26th of July, the Faculty of Law at the University of Sao Paulo launched a pro-democracy competition as a response to Bolsonaro's criticism of the electronic ballots and the Brazilian voting system in general. Over 3,000 signatures among intellectuals, artists, law experts, including retired justices of the Supreme Federal Court, business people, and others. On the 30th of July, the petition topped 540,000 signatures, and 4 days later it reached 700,000 endorsements. On the 17th of August, a report by Brazilian newspaper Metrópolis leaked an online conversation by a group of pro-Bolsonaro businessmen which expressed their preference for a coup d'etat rather than the return of Lula to the presidency. The businessmen stated that the Supreme Federal Court and the Superior Electoral Court were suspected of election fraud and proposed that a separate commission recount the votes. The messages also showed that business leader Jose Corey floated the idea of paying a bonus to employees who voted according to their employer's interests if it were legal, and that Mall's chain businessman Jose Isaac Perez ordered thousands of little flags to be distributed to shopkeepers and customers in Barra World Shopping, one of his company's malls. In response to the report, the businessmen declared their support for democracy and denied any encouragement of illegal activity. So you have if we're talking about cabals, right? Like there's the cabal's too cool for these guys. There's a group text of a couple of businessmen being like, guys, we gotta sway this shit. I would prefer a coup, but if we were waiting, can we just tell all of our workers to vote this way? I don't know if that's illegal in Brazil. I'm pretty sure that's illegal in America. Can anyone confirm? But, PT Noodles, you don't trust electronic voting either. You believe it's inherently flawed. Can you explain why it's inferior to counting the ballots by hand? International reactions. On the 9th of June, Bolsonaro and U.S. President Joe Biden met on the Summit of Americas in Los Angeles. Anonymous sources reported to Bloomberg that Bolsonaro asked for Biden's help with the election, saying that a possible administration of former President Lula would be against U.S. interests. Biden changed the subject when approached, but emphasized the importance of keeping the integrity of Brazil's elections. So Bolsonaro is asking for more help. Bolsonaro said that he respected democracy and would respect the election results. Biden's response echoed the comments made by Elizabeth Bagley, the U.S. ambassador to Brazil, nominated by Biden. The Portuguese-Spanish language spokesperson of the U.S. Department of State argued that the elections need to be transparent and monitored by international observers. Brazil's Justice Minister Anderson Torres responded that international observers were of little help and favored the participation of the federal police, the Brazilian armed forces, and civil society in the elections. In a June 2022 speech about human rights in various countries, Michelle Bachelet, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, cited concerns in Brazil such as threats to environmentalists and indigenous people, police violence, racism, and attacks against politicians, especially Afro-Brazilians, women, and LGBT people, ahead of the elections in October. She appealed to Brazilian authorities to ensure respect for fundamental rights and independent institutions. It was on the 6th of July, it was reported that members of the U.S. House of Representatives affiliated with the Democratic Party called for measures that would suspend American aid to the Brazilian military if it intervened in the election. That sounds pretty based. The amendment author, Tom Malinsky of New Jersey, withdrew the requirement with no opposition on the House floor from any representative except for Adam Schiff of California. Okay. Spokesperson for the U.S. Department of State was asked about the meeting with foreign diplomats hosted by Bolsonaro on the 18th of July, when Bolsonaro made disputed claims about the Brazilian electoral system. Price responded that U.S. officials had spoken with senior Brazilian officials about the electronic voting system. The U.S. view was that the Brazilian electoral system was successfully tested for many years and was a model for other nations, and the U.S. would follow the elections with great interest. So it's too easy to change the numbers of electronically counted votes, i.e. databases can be attacked by a single actor. What if someone just signed a bunch of papers and stuffed it? And having voting machines, it's easier to record the voting machines. But again, you're right that they could be hacked, but I would say that I'd say it's harder to hack a voting machine than it is for someone to just write in new ballots or paint new ballots or throw out certain physical ballots. I don't know how, this would require more automation in regards to it if you want to have more backups. Because otherwise you're just hoping that people are doing it correctly by hand rather than putting safeguards. So, on the 29th of September, the U.S. Senate passed a resolution co-sponsored by Bernie Sanders and Tim Kaine of Virginia, in which they called for the respect of their Brazilian election results and stressed that the U.S. would not support any government that comes to power through undemocratic means. On the 27th of September, it was reported that some public transportation companies, most of them bus companies, as well as city administrations whose mayors are Bolsonaro allies, would either suspend some buses' operations, claim a lack of funding for free travel passes that were usually granted to voters on Election Day, or order the vehicle sabotaged and engage in voter suppression. Poor and extremely poor voters, among whom Lula has been leading in the polls, were supposed to be the main target of the strategy since they could only resort to public transportation on their way to polling stations and back home. It was reported, doesn't seem like there were more substantiations, so it seemed like there was a possible attempt to suppress votes by ways of attacking public transit, which affected Lula voters more heavily, but I don't see anything more substantial here, so we'll wait on that. In the first round, despite some city administrators and senators asking the federal court to grant free rides to voters on Election Day, a major city in southern Brazil, whose mayor was a Bolsonaro supporter, announced that it was going to cut free travel passes because of budgetary costs for the first time in 25 years. After intense scrutiny by critics and politicians, it gave up on the plan. On the 29th of September, the Supreme Federal Court issued an injunction blocking public transportation operations from being reduced on Election Day. Based. Oh. On the 1st of October, the Bolsonaro campaign asked the Superior Electoral Court to immediately block free travel passes in the public transit system, arguing that the Supreme Federal Court's previous decision would hurt the city's finances because the cost of free rides on Election Day were allegedly not anticipated and previously agreed upon by their legislators. So they're trying to change a system there that had been in place for 2.5 decades. That feels like attempted suppression, if I'm being honest. Very easy suppression. Intimidation of voters. Voter intimidation, which includes coercion, threats of retaliation, workplace harassment, or promotion at work, so you can't promote things at work, is both an electoral and a labor crime in Brazil, and can also be considered a form of electoral fraud, voter suppression, and workplace bullying. Reports of such crime, which the main targets were employees, contractors, and suppliers, have grown in the country since at least early 2022. On the 19th of May, Havan, a retail chain, and its owner, billionaire Usano Hang, were both ordered to pay damages to a former employee of the company after a court found she had suffered workplace harassment as a way to force her to vote for Bolsonaro. Interesting. On the 5th of October, the Public Prosecutor's Office and a labor court issued a joint statement warning employers against voter intimidation in the workplace after Star and Extruser, two companies based in southern Brazil, had sent their suppliers a memorandum threatening to cut their production and funds from 2023 in the event that former President Lula was elected in 2022. So they're just the business leaders that are threatening. That's so fucked up. There were also reports of a brickworks in northern Brazil that publicly offered each of its employees cash if Bolsonaro were reelected, and of an agriculture businesswoman in northeastern Brazil who was charged with asking farmers to have no mercy in firing employees who voted for Lula. So there's active workplace intimidation, suppression, and potential bribery to try and get Bolsonaro. We'll see if this last thing has anything about Lula supporters doing the same. On the 10th of October, an agribusiness leader and husband of a mayor in the state of Goiás sent farmers a voice note threatening to shut his business if former President Lula were elected president, and saying that his employees were desperate to get people to change their minds not to vote for Lula in order to keep their jobs. On the 11th of October, the Labor Prosecutor's Office reported that it had received nearly 200 complaints of voter intimidation since the beginning of the election campaign in August 2020. So 200 complaints of intimidation in like 2 months. As of the 21st of October, there have been 1,112 reports of voter intimidation in 2022, far higher than a total of 212 reports in the 2018 elections, which made many prosecutors open joint task forces to investigate the cases. On the 22nd of October, employees of a meatpacking company in southeastern Brazil denounced that they were forced, among other things, to wear pro-Bolsonaro shirts while at work, reportedly violating several food safety rules besides the electoral law. This is so fucked. So there were several accounts of Brazilian business people and businesses trying to get their people to vote for Bolsonaro. In the second round, the reports spread on social media of the Federal Highway Police engaging in the unusual patterns of stops in poor areas that were expected to favor Lula, leading to calls for the closing of polling hour to be pushed back. The number of police searches of vehicles were 80% higher than reported on the 2nd of October, the day of the first round of voting, and directly violated an order from the Superior Electoral Court president to suspend such activities on Election Day. Stops disproportionately took place in the Northeast region, which has historically recorded the strongest vote for the Workers' Party. Police roadblocks also created a traffic jam on the Rio Nitori Bridge. Workers' Party supporters immediately called the actions an attempt at electoral subversion, and O Globo reported that the director of the PRF, or the Federal Highway Police, had posted and then deleted a video on Instagram endorsing Bolsonaro the previous night. Globo, you can't make this up. Globo additionally reported that the operation had been discussed in the office of President Bolsonaro on the 19th of October, suggesting it was performed at his direction. Does anyone have like a link on the political affiliation of O Globo? Activists made an appeal to Moraes, who ordered an immediate halt to the operations and subpoenaed Vasquez. However, Moraes claimed the operation did not stop anyone from voting and rejected a request from the PT to extend voting hours beyond the 5 p.m. deadline. Some commenters noted the importance of this election for Amazon rainforest as well as climate change. That's an environmental issue. Uses an endorsement on the 3rd of September. A medical journal, The Lancet, published an editorial calling the stakes in Brazil elections high and highlighting, among other things, that Bolsonaro, described as someone who is known for his volatility and indirect incitement of violence, will not go quietly if he was not reelected, as predictions have pointed to, and he had already criticized Brazil's electronic voting system in the presence of foreign ambassadors. It concluded that saying that there is an unprecedented chance for new beginnings in Latin America, an opportunity to make positive changes to alleviate deep neglect, inequality, and violence, and let's hope that Brazil... Okay, so it just seems like there was like an endorsement of Lula by the medical journal The Lancet, and then it had the second round. The British Weekly Scientific Journal published an editorial that it said a second term for incumbent Bolsonaro would represent a threat to science, to democracy, and the environment. So you had two journals, one a weekly scientific journal and one a medical journal, support Lula. I'm not sure if that's allowed. So PT Noodles, are you guys still arguing about the election thing? PT Noodles, you're saying like a single person could hack like a shit ton of voting machines. That's potentially possible. A single person could also stuff like a large ballot box full of thousands of votes. So the first round had Bolsonaro leading in regards to opinion polls. And then I believe Lula announced his campaign in 2021 following him getting his political rights granted back and then it seemed like Lula just was overtaking Bolsonaro was ahead of Bolsonaro by about 10 points for the vast majority of 2021 into 2022. It narrowed to like 8 points for the majority of 2022 into 2023. Sorry, 2022, like throughout 2022, by 8 points, but it remained relatively consistent. And then the second round, actual voting took place, and it looks like Bolsonaro supporters were underrepresented and Lula supporters were overrepresented, although Lula still pulled it out. Okay. Aftermath. One second, I'm gonna get some water really quick. All right. Let's keep going. So Lulu got the most in the first round with a lead of average of 5 points. Okay. Polls had suggested a lead of up to 15 points, and some predicted he'd been elected in the first round, so he did not clear that. So Lula underperformed, and Bolsonaro outperformed all published opinion polling. This is largely attributed to a significant number of supporters of minor candidates deciding to vote for Bolsonaro shortly before the election, along with a number of Bolsonaro supporters refusing to respond to pollsters in the view that pollsters were part of a fake news establishment. Okay. So this makes sense, right? There were reports in what we read before of far-right people being aggressive to pollsters and journalists. So it makes sense that Bolsonaro supporters would be underrepresented because they don't want to answer questions from journalists. It also said that Brazil had last conducted the census in 2010, and a number of pollsters had oversampled poor voters who normally over-supported Lula. Okay. In the second round, So the second round, both Bolsonaro and Lula sought key endorsements. Bolsonaro was endorsed by former Judge Sergio Moro and governors of Minas Gerais, Rio de Janeiro, and Sao Paulo. Simone Tebet and Ciro Gomez, the most voted presidential candidates to not advance to the runoff, so third and fourth place, they both endorsed Lula, as did former president Fernando Henrique Cardoso. While Tebet endorsed Lula, her party, the Brazilian Democratic Movement, was split and gave its leaders a freedom of choice. So it seemed like there was more support among the secondary parties for Lula than Bolsonaro. Okay. It was the closest presidential election in Brazil to date. In both rounds, Lula was the most voted candidate in the state of Amazonas and the country's bellwether, Minas Gerais, where Bolsonaro had been the most voted in 2018. There's also a shift among urban voters in the southeast. In the city of Rio, Bolsonaro had gotten 66% of the vote in 2018, but only 52.7% in 2022. And then acknowledging In the city of Sao Paulo, he obtained 60.4% in 2018, but Lula flipped the city in 2022 and received 53% of the vote. Bolsonaro allies acknowledging Lula's victory in that city helped to avoid a January 6th scenario from Stephen Letzi, author of How Democracies Die, referencing the 2021 U.S. Capitol attack, and that Brazil managed the election in a better way than the United States did in 2020. Some observers, such as Thomas Trauman, compared the results to Joe Biden's victory in 2020 and said that Lula was inheriting a nation that was much divided. Bolsonaro's better than expected performance reflected an election year with increased government spending. Political scientist Carlos Melo compared the election to the political climate experienced by former President Dilma Rousseff's re-election bid in the 2014 Brazilian presidential election. Both presidential elections in the second round received a higher percent of votes than they did in the first round in every state, but Bolsonaro's increase was greater than Lula's in every state. Amapá was the only state where the most voted candidate was different between the first round and the second, Bolsonaro. So that actually flipped for Bolsonaro in the second round. It was the first presidential campaign where more people voted in the second round than in the first round, and both rounds had the lowest percentage of invalid votes in the presidential elections since the two-round system was introduced in 1989. The second round was the first time when votes from abroad exceeded those in a Brazilian state. Wow. So, all right. So, congressional election result. In the National Congress of Brazil, right-wing parties expanded their majority while centrist and left-wing parties elected fewer members despite the Workers' Party-led coalition gaining seats, continuing the trend from the 2018 Brazilian general election. Several small parties did not satisfy the minimum number of elected members to maintain access to public funds, broadcast time, and congressional leadership. To satisfy the requirement, these members had to choose to individually join larger parties or their parties could merge. The goal of this requirement, first established in 2018, was to reduce the large number of parties in Congress and facilitate political negotiations between them. The growth of right-wing parties in the Congress was cited as a potential roadblock to Lula's policy goals when taking office. Despite right-wing shifts in both chambers, a number of conservative incumbents were not elected for the same or other offices, including Douglas Garcia. A number of milestones took place in the election for Congress, including two transgender activists, Erica Hilton and Duda Salabert, who became the first transgender individuals elected to Congress. That's super cool. And 5 self-declared indigenous Brazilians were elected as deputies, and 2 as senators, the largest number of self-declared indigenous candidates elected to Congress to date. That's pretty neat. All right. All right, reactions. After 90% of the votes were counted, see also, okay, so let's move to the election protest one. All right. The 2022 and 2023 Brazilian election protests began shortly after the conclusion of the 2022 general election second round on October 30th, in which Lula was elected president. Supporters of Bolsonaro, who frequently referred to in media accounts as Bolsonaroistas, alleging election fraud, began blocking roads and highways in the country. At least 23 Brazilian states, plus the federal district, recorded roadblocks as of the 1st of November, adding up to at least 267 roadblocks according to data from the Federal Highway Police. On the 8th of January 2023, supporters of Bolsonaro attacked and vandalized Brazil's Congress, Supreme Court, and presidential offices at the Praça de Três Poderes. The protesters have in common the rejection of the election result and a call for a coup or federal or military intervention to prevent the inauguration of the elected president, which affronts the Brazilian constitution. These blockades have been widely criticized by entities, politicians, and authorities due to the fact that they have caused large losses of food, paralysis of supply products such as fuel and medicines, impediment to the citizens' right to transit, cancellation of flights, accidents, and deaths. They've also been called attacks against democracy as they contest the electoral process and its legitimacy. The blockades have been since criticized as domestic terrorism by some Brazilian media. This claim is largely disputed. Okay, so people are saying that it's disruptive, they're attacks on democracy, but it's disputed that they're terrorist attacks. People are disputing that. So, on the 8th of January, pro-Bolsonaro supporters stormed the Praça de Três Poderes, vandalizing the Chamber of Deputies and federal state halls of the National Congress of Brazil in the process. Protesters also invaded the Supreme Federal Court Palace and the Palacio de Planalto in an attempt to overthrow the federal government. The insurrection failed, and Praga was cleared by law enforcement after a few hours. Several thousand Bolsonaro supporters were arrested following the event. Damn. Background. The protests were motivated by the false belief that the 2022 Brazilian general election was suffered from widespread electoral fraud, causing Bolsonaro's loss. During his presidency, Bolsonaro fueled distrust in the electoral system in Brazil. As we substantiated that, this was further fueled by Bolsonaro supporters alleging fraud of the electronic voting machines, malfunctioning, and voting patterns they deemed suspicious, and who entrust election officials. The military helped oversee the election and found no signs of fraud. Another reason for the protesters was their dislike for Lula, who defeated Bolsonaro in the elections after his controversial convictions in Operation Car Wash had been annulled. Additionally, Bolsonaro did not recognize or accept his loss and paved the way for the peaceful transfer of power until 45 hours after the election had concluded. So he waited 2 days. Social media was used by supporters of Bolsonaro to spread misinformation about electoral fraud, motivating the protesters. Reserve military wanted a trucker strike before the second round, like Reserve Colonel Marcos Corey. A video published on the 16th of October was one of several attempts by Corey to incite a general strike of truckers before the second round of elections. The idea was that drivers should paralyze Brazil to show support for Bolsonaro, who would have time to publish a provincial measure that would institute printed voting. Corey's video about the shutdowns were shared in several Bolsonaro groups on Telegram, and days later, members of these same groups started advocating roadblocks after the elections. Calls for the shutdown were made on TikTok and on YouTube. So, timeline. Supporters of Bolsonaro, including truck drivers, started blockades around the country on the night of the 30th of October when the election results were announced. Until the night of the 31st of October, the PRF had registered 321 points of blockages or agglomerations on roads in 25 states and the federal district. The state with the highest number of blocks was Santa Catarina. The Federal Highway Police announced on the 9th of November that all federal highways have been cleared of roadblocks and interdictions, with a total of 1,087 demonstrations being broken up. Truckers began protesting again on the 18th of November, with the Federal Highway Police stating that new blockades were different than the previous ones, noting that protesters had adopted violent methods, which occurred mostly at night. On the 1st of November, members of the Gavio de Fel, organized fans of Corinthians, dispersed protesters that were interdicting the Marginal Tietê, the main highway in São Paulo, and put a banner saying, "We are for democracy." The following day, more fans mobilized against the blockade on the President Dutra Highway, which connects São Paulo to Rio de Janeiro, dispersing the demonstrators and removing signs and flags that called for federal intervention. Attacks against police and civilians. On the 1st of November, protesters threatened to burn alive students from the Federal University of Rio on the grounds that they were supposedly supporters of President-elect Lula. And on the 7th of November, the city that gave Bolsonaro the highest number of votes in the second round, the Federal Highway Police officers were attacked by protesters who blocked the BR-163, as soon as the road. The protesters threw stones and shot at 4 vehicles while shouting profanities. A child was poisoned by gas thrown by police to contain the protesters. According to the PRF, the child received prompt care, and the corporation continues to negotiate and seek a peaceful solution to unlock the highway. Not potential Nazi salute. The state of Santa Catarina had registered a large expansion of neo-Nazi groups in recent years. But all right. The consequences. The blockades of roads have affected several sectors of society, such as meat and milk industries, partial paralysis of the meat industry, and the supply of supermarkets and gas stations. Several hospitals were also affected. There was a general concern about the supply of oxygen and other supplies. Some hospitals had to cancel surgeries. And the Butantan Institute informed that a load of eggs that will be used to produce vaccines against the flu was stuck in the blockade near Jundiaí. If the cargo does not arrive at Butantan, which is located in the west zone of Sao Paulo, the production of 1.5 million doses of the immunizer against H3N2 will be compromised. Oof. Blockades have caused fatal accidents. Da-da-da-da. And in Sao Paulo, a driver ran over protesters on the highway, leaving 17 injured. Okay. Street protests. The protests on the roads lost strength on the 3rd of November, but supporters of Bolsonaro started concentrating on the vicinity of Brazilian armed forces facilities, such as military barracks and the Tio de Guerra buildings, in acts and vigils against the victory of Lula since then. The movement is spread across the country and has no defined national leaders. Demonstrations were recorded at military installations in the cities of Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Brasilia, Florianopolis, Recife, Salvador, among other Brazilian cities and regions. Protesters camped a call for a military coup to prevent the inauguration of Lula in some cities. Reports sent by the military, civil and federal police, and public ministries of the state and the federal district to the Supreme Court indicate that politicians, police, unionists, and ruralists encourage and finance the protests, and that most of the demonstrators are elderly with a small presence of young people and families. Whew. During the Republican Proclamation Day on the 15th of November, Bolsonaro supporters held protests across the country. On the 12th of December, when Lula's electoral victory was officially ratified by Brazilian courts, militant hard-right Bolsonaro supporters stormed the federal police headquarters in Brasilia and torched vehicles on the street after one of the protesters was arrested for inciting violence in order to prevent the swearing-in of Lula. The police used stun grenades and tear gas to disperse them. A bombing attempt near the Brasilia International Airport was prevented by police on the 23rd of December, and the suspect was arrested a day later. According to his testimony, he was motivated by Bolsonaro casting doubts at the integrity of the electoral process in the past. On the 29th of December, the police tried removing protesters from around the Brazilian army headquarters, but were forced to withdraw after they turned violent. A man carrying an explosive device and knife was arrested on the 1st of January 2023 when trying to enter the Esplanade of Brasilia, where supporters of Lula were celebrating his swearing in. Bolsonaro supporters stormed the buildings of the National Congress, Palácio de Alvorada, and the Federal Supreme Court on the 8th of January and clashed with the police. Rioters smashed some of the property inside the three buildings, while the police used pepper spray and tear gas against them. President Lula was not present at the presidential palace when it was stormed, and Brazilian media estimated the total number of intruders in three buildings was around 3,000. All three federal buildings were later cleared, with more than 115 people arrested. False or old images of battle tanks on the streets were spread, and Bolsonaro supporters protesting in front of the Eastern Military Command celebrated and cried after hearing that a federal intervention was decreed and that TSE's Minister Alexandre de Moraes was arrested for fraud in electronic voting machines. This was later confirmed as being fake news. So there's fake news of battle tanks, fake news of a minister being arrested for fraud in the electronic voting machines. The false information that Lady Gaga would actually be the prime minister of the International Criminal Court located in The Hague went viral on Twitter. The hoax was accompanied by a montage where the senator appeared to participate in a video conference with Bolsonaro and claimed that Stephanie Germanotta, her real name, was analyzing electoral fraud in Brazil. There was also false information about the alleged death of Lula. It was also spread online. Okay. Demands for investigation into possible funding for the blockades and demonstrations have grown, likely due to the circulation of videos of organized stalls serving drinks and food, including barbecues. The Attorney General, hey guys, grind set every day. You're trying to overthrow this country, I will sell you cotton candy. That's so fucked up. What's up, Sam? What's up, Sam? Flashback to Lady Gaga saying she was personally investigating January 6th. True. Let's see. Businessmen from several states financed caravans to Brasilia to reinforce the protest calling for a military intervention in front of the army's headquarters in the city. More than 70 trucks with the Brazilian flag arrived on November 6th and 7th. Entrepreneurs from the municipality of Agboa in Mato Grosso organized a joint action by sending 23 trucks. 12 trucks bore the name of Agritex, a reseller of agricultural machinery, parts, and equipment, and another 7 vehicles displayed the logo of Grupo Comeli from Rio Verde, Goiás, a company specialized in biomass processing. In all, vehicle license plates are from at least 4 states. On the 3rd of November, the military police of Alagoas delivered a report to the STF identifying WhatsApp and Telegram groups and the leaders involved in the state's acts. The police concluded that leaderships are not centralized. Leaderships of the Caio Gustavo Francisco Canero de Cunha stands out, candidate for federal deputy in the general election of 2022. On November 8th, the public ministries of Sao Paulo, San Catarina, and Espírito Santo have made complaints to the TSC about financing part of businessmen, municipal buses that transported demonstrators, and financing by PICs. Espírito Santo, businessmen sold their products during the protests. In Santa Catarina, there were participation of politicians, including a councillor. On the same day, the civil police of Parana sent a report denouncing a councillor and several former councillors, a municipal deputy, an advisor to federal deputy, and numerous businessmen organizing and financing the protests. Among them are Aurelio Ramos de Oliveira Neto, Sando Nascimento Fiara Branco, and Eder Moro. So, there are several former councilors and a councilor, a municipal attorney, and an advisor to federal deputy, and there's numerous businessmen organizing and financing these protests. On the 12th of November, the MPF asked the Ministry of Defense, Paulo Sergei Nogueira de Oliveira, to identify those responsible for calling and financing the protests. On the 17th of November, Minister Alexei de Moraes decided to block 43 bank accounts of individuals and legal entities suspected of financing anti-democratic acts. In this case, his quote from him, in this case, there's been repeated abuse of the right to assemble, illicitly and criminally directed to propagate non-compliance and disrespect for the result of the election for president and vice presidents of the Republic, whose result was proclaimed by the Superior Electoral Court on the 30th of October, with subsequent disruption from the democratic state of law and the installation of an exception regime. All right. There were rumors circulated linking businessman Luciano Hang to the organization financing of the demonstrations, mainly due to the preference of the protesters to carry out concentrations in front of chain stores Havan. The businessman denied contributing to the organization of the movement. However, it was confirmed in a report by Agencia Publica, which had exclusive access to documents from the Federal Highway Police, that the chains of stores Havan sent its service trucks to the roadblocks along with Transben Transportes, a company named after his wife, Adria Beventi Huang, Huang's sister-in-law and father-in-law, and Premix Consecro. The companies organized the trucks to KM 83 of the BR 101 in Baravella for a protest that took place in front of the Merci gas station close to a Havan store. In Palhoca, a Havan store even offered chairs, benches, and access to the bathroom and electrical connection for the speakers to the protesters. So there are some stores and people that are supporting them from there. And that some chains are supporting them. But it doesn't seem like there's any confirmation if the guy on the top is saying this. So. All right. That's pretty interesting. All right. Criticisms of responses by the military and federal highway polices. On the day of the blockades, the federal highway polices had activated the Office of the General Counsel for the Union to ensure the flow of roads, but the AGU responded that the PRF could act without authorization from the agency. The PRF released a statement saying that it has adopted all measures to return the flow to normal and that it is prioritizing dialogue to ensure the right to protest. Some people criticized the apparent inaction of the PRF, which the day before conducted operations considered illegal throughout the country. Several videos were released in which the policemen said that they wouldn't do anything about the blockade. In one, the policeman states that the order was only to monitor the demonstrations. The Supreme Federal Court, STF, ordered that the PRF immediately unblock the roads under penalty of 100,000 Brazilian money per hour to General Director Silvani Vasquez. I'm sorry for butchering all these names, by the way, guys. I'm not a native Spanish speaker. I don't speak Spanish. I'm doing my best. Minister Alexander de Moraes issued a note on the 31st of October urging the PRF to take all necessary and sufficient measures to open the roads. The determination cites the omissive and inert posture of Director General Silvani Vasquez. The letter states the possibility of removal of the director if he fails to comply with the determination. Besides the PRF, the president of the TSC demanded collaboration of other public security forces to clear the roads. Videos circulated of PRF officers aligning themselves with the protesters, and newspapers reported that the tone of policemen is one of leniency. I guess that's not surprising that the same police group that were supposedly pulling over people illegally on the day of election day are kind of soft on the election people that lost. That's not pushing conspiracy theory. It's odd. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to do it, just asking questions. It just seems interesting. The police officers had not been removed as the organization believes it needs as many people as possible to act during the protests. And in December of 2022, members of the military police of Mato Grosso were eating in a camp set up by protesters in front of the 13th Motorized Infantry Brigade of the Military Command West in Coaba, approached and detained students who filmed them without clear accusation. So there were members of military police that were eating in a camp set up by protesters, and they approached and detained students who filmed them. So... It's Portuguese. I'm so fucking sorry, guys. I fucked up. I knew this. I remember the fucking things where... I remember when they were talking about colonization and like Portugal and Spain had like set up like the line of like, not demarcation. It was like this line of colonization where like everything west of the line was Spain's and everything right of the line was Portugal's. And it just so happened that like, turns out the Portuguese had Brazil. I was like, I'm sorry, guys. I fucked up. I know it's there, okay? And that's why Brazil is Portuguese while the majority of Latin America is Spanish. All right? I failed. The Treaty of Tordesillas. Thank you, Okulicho. Based history person in chat. I'm sorry. See how I fixed that? But you're still here listening to me, so you're welcome. Oh. Let's see. Okay. Let's keep moving. So, and let's look at some stuff on this specifically. So, this is from BBC. Brazilian riots, arrests ordered for top officials after the capital is stormed. Brazil's judicial authorities have offered the arrests of top public officials after rioters stormed key government buildings in Brazil. One official, the former commander of the military police, has been arrested, local media reported. The officials also include Brazil's former public security chief, Anderson Torres, and others responsible for acts and omissions leading to the riots, the Attorney General office said. Mr. Torres denies any role in the riots. Colonel Fabio Augusto, the police commander, was dismissed from his role after supporters of ex-President Bolsonaro stormed Congress, the presidential palace, and the Supreme Court. The rioting came a week after President Lula was sworn in. The dramatic scene saw thousands of protesters, some clad in yellow Brazil football shirts and waving flags, overran police and ransacked the heart of the Brazilian state. Of the approximately 1,500 people arrested and brought to the police after the riot, officials say that nearly 600 have been taken to other facilities where police officials have 5 days to formally charge them. Earlier on Tuesday, the federal intervener in public security accused Mr. Torres of a structured sabotage operation. Ricardo Capelli, who has been appointed to run security in Brasilia, said there was a lack of command from Mr. Torres before government buildings were stormed. Lula's inauguration on the 1st of January was an extremely successful security operation, Mr. Capelli told CNN. What changed before Sunday was that on the 2nd of January, Anderson Torres took over as Secretary of Security, dismissed the entire command, and traveled. Bro! If this isn't sabotage, I don't know what is. Good lord. Okay, so Lula's inauguration on the 1st was a successful security operation. And what changed before Sunday was that on the 2nd, so the day after the inauguration, Anderson Torres took over as Secretary of Security and dismissed the entire command and traveled. Ooh. Oh. Mr. Torres said he deeply regretted the absurd hypotheses that he played in any part in the riots. He said the scenes, which occurred during his family holiday, were lamentable and said it was the most bitter day of his personal and professional life. Lula has accused security forces of neglecting their duty and not halting the terrorist acts in Brazil. So Lula is calling these acts terrorism. Public prosecutors asked on Tuesday for a federal audit court to freeze Mr. Bolsonaro's assets in light of the riots. The former president, who has condemned the riots, has not admitted defeat. He hasn't admitted defeat? I thought he... The former president... Can we get a fact check there? It says that Bolsonaro did not admit defeat from the October election that divided the nation and flew to the U.S. before the handover on the 1st of January. On Monday, he was admitted to a hospital He said on Tuesday he returned to Brazil, and a day after the riots, heavily armed officers started dismantling a camp of Bolsonaro supporters in Brazil. Yeah, one of a number that has been set up outside army barracks around the country since the presidential election. Mr. Torres, who previously served as Bolsonaro's justice minister, was fired from his role as Secretary of Public Security on Sunday by Brasilia Governor Ibanez Rocha. Mr. Rocha himself was later removed from the post for 90 days by the Supreme Court. Lula's taken aim at the security forces, accusing them of incompetence, bad faith, or malice for failing to stop demonstrators accessing Congress. You will see in the images that the police officers are guiding people on the walk to Praça de Três Powers. We are going to find out who the finest of these vandals who went to Brasilia are, and they will all pay with the force of law. Video shared by the Brazilian outlet O Globo showed some officers laughing and taking photos together. Demonstrators occupy the congressional campus in the background. Saturday and Sunday, about 4,000 Bolsonaro supporters arrived in buses and joined others camped outside army barracks. At 1400 on Sunday, march starts along Main Avenue towards Congress, coming up at least just before 1500 on Sunday. Protesters break for, and those who don't know, like 24-hour time, that's like 3 o'clock. Protesters break through barriers and storm Congress. Others invade the presidential palace, damaging artwork and furniture. 1545, protesters smash glass front of Supreme Court building and vandalize the chamber. In most, protesters are cleared. Police use water cannon and sun grenades to disperse the crowds. And then at 1830, the crowds still remain outside the buildings. Okay, so good Lord. Okay, so I think I've seen pretty much everything I need to see for this in particular. One second. So, from everything I've read, right, again, to be fair, I've read 2 Wikipedia articles and a BBC thread. And from this, it seems like the vast majority of violence was perpetrated by Bolsonaro supporters. That there seems to have been massive levels of potential intimidation. Sorry, massive is wrong. There are levels of intimidation by workers, bosses, attempts by, like potential reports of police pulling people over when they shouldn't have on election day in districts that favor Lula. It seems like afterwards there were Bolsonaro didn't concede for 2 days afterwards, apparently. And the BBC article said he never conceded. I'm going to Google that really quick. And then he fled to America. Bolsonaro did not concede. All right. Has Bolsonaro conceded yet? Everything right now. Has Bolsonaro conceded? All right. It says it's over, Bolsonaro said, but he reportedly accepts defeat, but he's previously... Okay. So he does not concede, but authorizes a changeover in government. So he hasn't technically conceded yet. He's just offering the potential for... what's it called? Like, he's just offering the allowing of, what's it called? Like, of the transition. But he personally has not, like, fully conceded. So he has encouraged these, I would say, you know, unfounded attacks on Brazilian voting security, Brazilian election security, which there doesn't seem to be a ton of evidence for. Then he loses the election twice. It was closer than most people expected for reasons about underreporting about his actual support, and several smaller candidates that like end up supporting him in the end. And then he has not conceded. He has fled to America. Sorry, he has gone to America since then. And Lula wasn't sworn in until the 1st. When did Bolsonaro leave for America? Let's see. When did Bolsonaro leave for America? All right, give me, when did he leave? When did he leave? Let's see. Okay, so it said he left 2 days after his term ended. So he didn't leave before his term ended. So that's not. You just use your everyday, average, wacky Florida vacation. You know what I mean? Okay, so he stayed for the majority of his term, but he still hasn't conceded yet. And it looks like now they're trying to extradite him, saying like, hey, come back to Brazil. So there's no excuse for supporters storming the buildings. And that's pretty messed up. It seems messed up that Bolsonaro incited these claims and the potential for these claims. And there doesn't seem to be any hard evidence of fraud, which would make this more make this more reasonable. I haven't seen any of them. It seems like most of his claims about election security were off. There seem to be small efforts by various business people to sway the election towards Bolsonaro. And there were numerous complaints and increased levels of violence, primarily seemingly perpetrated by Bolsonaro supporters during the lead up to these elections. So all of that tells me that you have a standard story of a right-wing populist inciting fear and distrust of his country's electoral process with very little to base those claims off of. And then not conceding and then allowing the country to collapse into chaos. It's pretty fucked up. I think that's very fucked up. I don't like that at all. So, cringe and soy even. So, why is it never a left-wing insurrection? I guess you could say that maybe right-wingers are more aggressive in trying to overthrow elections. Because it seems, at least in America, right? At least I can't talk about left-wing dictatorships, right? But it seems like at least in democracies, left-leaning parties don't seem to overthrow the government. So, because normally to overthrow the government, you have to have sort of a belief that the rule of law is broken, or you just have to be that willing to break the law to install a dictator. I would say most left-leaning people aren't willing to do that. There are some anti-democratic left-leaning people, right, who want to be tankies and have a Marxist dictatorship over the United States, but the vast majority of left-leaning or progressive people, or even just box standard liberals, they're not willing to overthrow a government. So that seems to be the case for most people. So on the left, and to be fair, most Republicans, I would also agree, wouldn't overthrow an election, right? But there's a substantial number of right-wing figures, including those in the United States, who are who like denying elections that basically claim. Lefties will protest and riot. Righties will instruct the shit of the Capitol. PT News, true. They will do that. Lefties will cause massive property damage, and they will riot. But their riot isn't targeted at the seats of government. So, pretty cringe. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this more of a deeper dive into the Brazil stuff. I definitely have a better understanding of it now. I hope you do as well. And I have a special treat for all of you guys tonight, okay? I want everyone to stay with me, okay? So, a very good friend of mine has just started streaming, and it is his first ever stream. And I want to surprise him with a raid. He's one of my best friends. He's a great dude. And if you don't like aggressively seeing how the world is broken, then you should definitely follow me, and we are going to raid into his stream. He is a hardcore Pokemon Nuzlocker. If you liked any of my Pokemon Nuzlocke streams, if you like that sort of stuff, and you want someone who's similar to me, who does a lot of that sort of stuff, but he wants to just play Pokemon, he's not a politics guy, he just wants to have a chill stream where he plays ridiculously challenging Pokemon Nuzlocke runs, then please stay with me, and we are going to raid my buddy Koala. You might have heard of him because he and I have played video games together on this stream. So I am going to get the raid ready. Everyone, please stick around. It would really make his night. So everyone, get in. Let's go, Hanzites, the Hansies. Thank you, Wonder Years. I really appreciate it. I've been looking cute. I know I look cute, right? I've been working on it. I think I'm a good-looking guy, you know? See, the hairlining isn't receding yet. All right, guys. Thank you all so much for tonight. I'll be back tomorrow with another research stream. We're probably going to do some research into the Twitter files, maybe Ukraine. We'll see how it goes, all right? So let me know, and I will see you all tomorrow. Everyone give my best to Koala. He's a great guy. He deserves this. Let's go!